She always thought the worst thing someone could do to her was scream in her face, call her names, or lock her in a room. But she never expected that the deepest wound would come from silence, calculated, cruel silence, and the flicker of orange flames curling around the edge of her dreams. The envelope had been sitting on the kitchen table for 2 days, unopened, while she scrubbed the floors and boiled water for her stepmother's herbal teas. It was the one thing she had waited for, the one thing that meant her life could finally begin. And then, without a word, her stepmother tossed it into the fireplace as if it were a crumpled receipt. No explanation, no apology. Just a satisfied smirk and a shrug of indifference. In that moment, the girl realized this wasn't just about control. It was war. Her freedom had been within reach, the result of years of sacrifice, study, and silent endurance. And it had been stolen, not by a stranger, not by fate, but by the very woman who was supposed to help raise her. What came next wasn't just rebellion. It was escape. From the outside, everything looked quiet. A modest house tucked away in a sleepy suburb where white fences and trimmed hedges gave the illusion of peace. Inside, however, the walls carried a silence heavy with tension. The girl moved through the house like a shadow, unnoticed, uncelebrated, and unquestionably bound to a life that never quite felt like her own. She had learned early on not to make noise, not to ask for anything, and certainly never to expect praise. Praise was reserved for others, Laura's children, the precious twins with golden hair and perfect smiles, who ran through the hallways spilling juice and shouting demands. The girl cleaned it up. She always did. She had been cleaning up ever since her mother died. When her father remarried, she was only 10, still small enough to believe that grown-ups told the truth when they said things would get better. Laura smiled with red lips and brought cookies the first day they met. She kissed her forehead and called her sweetheart. But it didn't take long for the cookies to turn stale and the endearments to curdle into commands. "Watch the boys," Laura would say. "Clean up after dinner," she would insist. "You're old enough to help around here." And the girl, unsure of how to say no, obeyed. School became her escape. It was the only place she felt like she mattered. Teachers praised her essays, her quiet diligence, her hunger for knowledge. She'd sit at the back of the classroom and drink in every word, her mind reaching far beyond the suburb, imagining cities filled with lights and strangers and possibility. The guidance counselor once asked what she wanted to be, and she said, without hesitating, an astrophysicist. It had come out louder than she intended, like a secret she had buried deep but could no longer contain. The counselor blinked, smiled politely, and handed her a scholarship brochure. She spent her free hours at the public library. It was only a 10-minute walk from the house, but it felt like stepping into another universe. There, no one yelled her name. No one asked for juice, or help with homework, or accused her of being ungrateful when she asked to stay a little longer at school. In the library, she could lose herself in the stars, in equations that made no sense until they suddenly did. She took online courses in physics, astronomy, even computer science, carefully using free trials and fake email addresses to avoid suspicion. She hid her notebooks under a loose floorboard in her room, wrapped in old shirts to muffle the sound in case Laura came storming in without knocking. She planned in silence. She made spreadsheets in her mind, GPA, SAT scores, potential schools, financial aid deadlines. She memorized addresses of colleges and studied the essays of students who had made it out. Every small success, an A on a test, a compliment from a teacher, was like a pebble building a bridge across an ocean. She couldn't see the other side yet, but she believed in it. She had to. Dinner time was always the worst. Her father, once a man who used to braid her hair and take her to the park on weekends, now barely looked up from his plate. Laura sat beside him like a queen, managing the table with a sharp tongue and a glass of wine. She had mastered the art of cutting the girl down without ever raising her voice. "Some people just aren't meant for college," she would murmur, as if to herself. "They don't have the personality for it. Too quiet. Too slow. You have to know how to talk to people." The girl would nod and keep eating. She had learned that answering back only prolonged the moment. But inside, she was building a resistance, quiet and steady. She read biographies of women who had been told no and done it anyway. She clipped quotes from interviews and taped them inside her notebook. Every insult became fuel. Every slammed door a wind at her back. She found her mother's old necklace in a dusty box in the attic, a delicate silver chain with a tiny star pendant. She started wearing it under her clothes, hidden from view, a silent reminder of who she came from, and who she could still become. Her mother had loved the stars. She remembered that. They used to sit by the window on clear nights and name constellations together. It was the last memory that felt whole, untouched by anger or noise. The necklace was more than a trinket. It was an anchor. Laura's children got new tablets for Christmas. The girl got socks. She didn't complain. She never did. But that night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the dull ache of being invisible pressing down on her ribs. She whispered her college essay out loud like a prayer. She had written and rewritten it a dozen times in her head, a story about resilience, about silence, about finding power in places no one looked. About how surviving didn't make you weak, it made you precise. Focused. Unshakable. She mailed her applications using the school's address as a return point. She saved lunch money and birthday cards from her grandmother to pay the application fees. Every envelope dropped in the mailbox felt like a revolt. She never told anyone. Secrets were safer when kept quiet. There were nights she almost gave up. Nights when she scrubbed food off the kitchen tile while the twins laughed in the other room, her knees burning and her stomach growling. Nights when her father passed her in the hallway like she didn't exist. Nights when she stood in the dark hallway, staring at the front door, wondering what would happen if she just walked out. But then she would touch the star around her neck and remember, this wasn't forever. She believed in leaving. She believed in science, and the stars, and that somewhere far from here, someone would read her words and say yes. That her voice, however quiet, would finally matter. All she needed was a letter. One letter to change everything. One letter to set her free. And then one day, it came. The envelope was thicker than usual, its edges stiff, the university's crest embossed in deep navy across the front. She had seen photos of letters like this online, in videos where teenagers cried and laughed as their dreams came true, holding them up for the world to see. But in her hands, it trembled like something forbidden. She pulled it from the mailbox while no one was watching, her heart thudding with a rhythm that almost hurt. She didn't rip it open right away. She held it against her chest, just for a second, and closed her eyes. It was real. Tangible. Proof that her voice had been heard. She took the long way into the house, slipping the envelope between the pages of a book she always carried. She had imagined this moment in hundreds of different ways, her father lifting her in joy, Laura shocked into silence, the children asking if they could visit her in her dorm. But reality never bent the way dreams did. Inside, the kitchen was chaotic. One of the twins had spilled cereal across the floor, the other was crying over a broken toy, and Laura stood at the stove, complaining into her phone. Her father wasn't home yet. She knew that meant she had only a small window of privacy. She slipped past the noise and into her room, shut the door softly, and finally opened the envelope. Her hands shook as she unfolded the letter. A full scholarship. Admission into the fall semester. Access to housing, meals, textbooks. A dream lined out in clean, official language. She pressed her hand over the words, afraid they might vanish. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. She read it again. And again. Each time it felt more impossible, more miraculous. She whispered the name of the university under her breath like a secret spell. But the spell didn't hold. She had left her door open just a crack. Not wide enough to invite attention, but enough for a sharp eye to notice. And Laura always noticed. The footsteps came fast, the voice sharper than usual, slicing through her quiet joy like a knife. In the seconds before the door burst open, she shoved the letter back into the envelope and tucked it beneath her pillow, but it was too late. Laura's eyes landed on the corner peeking out. She crossed the room before the girl could even stand. She snatched the envelope, read the front, and her lips curled, not in surprise, not even in confusion. It was rage. Rage disguised as calm. What followed didn't make sense at first. Laura stormed out of the room with the letter in hand, her nails digging into the paper, creasing it beyond repair. The girl chased her through the hallway, her voice small but rising in panic. No one listened. The twins watched from the living room, wide-eyed and silent for once. The front door was open, the sun still low, and Laura headed straight for the fireplace in the den. It was summer. No fire had burned there for months. But there was always a box of matches on the mantel, left from winter. The letter burned fast. Dry, high-quality paper turned to black in seconds. The golden crest dissolved into smoke. The girl reached forward, but Laura held her back with a single stiff arm, watching the flames with satisfaction. She didn't scream. She didn't gloat. It was worse than that, she acted as if this was natural, as if this was a correction, not a crime. The girl stared at the fire, her mouth open, her throat closing around something she couldn't name. Grief. Fury. Helplessness. She turned to her father, who had arrived mid-chaos, still holding his keys, his face unreadable. He glanced at the ashes, then at his wife, then at his daughter. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't demand an explanation. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked into the kitchen, set his keys down, and asked what was for dinner. Everything froze in that moment. The girl felt herself detach. She wasn't in her body anymore. She was somewhere above, watching a quiet betrayal unfold. The man who was supposed to protect her, who once called her his little star, couldn't even meet her eyes. And Laura? She went back to stirring a pot like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just extinguished the culmination of years of effort, like she hadn't just rewritten the course of a life with a flick of her wrist. Later that night, the house buzzed with ordinary sounds. The television hummed in the living room. The dishwasher clinked and rumbled. The twins bickered over whose turn it was to bathe first. No one spoke of the letter. No one asked how she felt. Her father said goodnight with a nod and closed his door. Laura passed her in the hallway and smiled, the kind of smile that dared her to speak up, knowing no one would listen. In her room, the girl sat on the floor beside her bed. The corner of the pillow still smelled faintly of ink and paper. She wrapped her arms around her knees and rocked, slowly, not to comfort herself, but to keep from breaking. Her dreams had always felt fragile, but she never imagined how easy it would be for someone else to destroy them. It hadn't just been a letter. It had been her way out. Her only way out. She didn't cry. Not that night. There was no space for tears. Only silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. She stared at the wall for hours, replaying it all again and again, as if some part of her still believed that if she could just find the right moment, the right decision, she could undo it. But there was no rewind. The ashes were real. The smoke had curled up the chimney and vanished into the sky. The next morning, life continued. Dishes to wash. Children to dress. Floors to mop. Laura handed her a list of chores, longer than usual, and told her to hurry. There was a tone in her voice that hadn't been there before, ownership. Authority reinforced by fire. The girl took the list. She didn't speak. Her hands moved, her feet carried her from task to task, but inside her mind was still burning. Quietly. Relentlessly. A different kind of fire. She knew now what she hadn't fully accepted before: no one was coming to save her. Not her father. Not her teachers. Not even the university that had offered her a future. The world wasn't going to make room for her. She would have to tear her way through it. But not yet. First, she would have to survive. She would have to wait. Watch. Learn. And when the moment came, when no one expected it, she would run. Not out of fear. But out of purpose. Because dreams, when turned to ash, do not disappear. They smolder. And one day, they ignite again. Like a sentence. The sunlight that once warmed her windowsill now felt cold and intrusive, like an unwanted guest reminding her that she no longer had anything to look forward to. The letter was gone, the dream scorched, and the silence in the house had grown deeper, more suffocating. She moved through each day as if underwater, slow and voiceless, barely seen but always needed. Her chores multiplied. The twins suddenly couldn't do anything for themselves. One forgot how to tie his shoes, the other claimed she didn't know how to hold a fork properly. Laura didn't correct them. In fact, she encouraged the helplessness, calling it training for responsibility, as she handed the girl a fresh list of tasks each morning, scrawled in red pen and underlined with irritation. She no longer went to the library. The key to the front door disappeared, and Laura told her the locks had been changed. Her school attendance slipped. At first, she tried to keep going, waking early, sneaking out through the kitchen before anyone noticed. But one morning, her father stood by the door with crossed arms and asked where she thought she was going. She explained. He didn't respond. Laura walked in with a smug expression and said something about priorities and helping the family. That was the last time she saw the inside of her classroom. Days lost their names. Time was marked only by repetition. Dishes, laundry, grocery runs she wasn't allowed to make, cleaning stains that reappeared every night, packing lunches she wouldn't eat. She scrubbed the same surfaces until her knuckles cracked, her fingers red and sore from bleach and hot water. The kitchen became her prison cell, the mop her chain. Her body moved, her hands obeyed, but her thoughts wandered like ghosts. She thought about dorm rooms filled with books and laughter. She thought about late nights studying under fairy lights, walking across campuses with headphones in, attending lectures from professors who spoke of galaxies and theories, not soap brands and sponge rotations. Her father stopped calling her by name. He spoke in orders or not at all. Once, when a glass slipped from her hands and shattered, he said nothing. Just looked at her with tired eyes and walked away. The silence between them had once been awkward. Now it was absolute. Laura, on the other hand, became louder, more pointed, her voice the only one that echoed through the house. She offered praise to her children in sugary tones, calling them brilliant for remembering to flush or picking up a spoon. Then she would glance at the girl, not with cruelty exactly, but with a cold satisfaction. A victor overseeing her spoil. The twins mocked her. They had learned by now that she couldn't fight back, that there would be no consequences for their cruelty. They called her names when no one was listening. They laughed when she tripped over scattered toys. Once, they locked her in the pantry for almost an hour and told Laura she was playing hide and seek. When she emerged pale and shaken, Laura just told her to stop being so dramatic. She wasn't a child anymore. Sleep became her only escape, but even that betrayed her. She would wake up exhausted, her limbs heavy, her eyes burning. She began keeping a small notebook, stolen from the back of a drawer. At night, when the house finally fell quiet, she'd sit under her blanket with a flashlight and write. Not letters. Not plans. Just thoughts. Sentences. Pieces of herself she didn't want to lose. I am still here. This is not who I am. I will not disappear. Each page a whisper against the silence. There was no phone. Laura had taken hers months ago, claiming she didn't need it. The house had a landline, but it was locked in a drawer in the master bedroom. The internet password had been changed, and she wasn't allowed to use the computer without supervision. Once, she tried to sneak online during a rare moment alone in the living room, but Laura returned unexpectedly and shut the screen before she could finish opening the browser. After that, the laptop disappeared. And yet, despite everything, a tiny flame remained inside her. Something raw and quiet, like a pilot light waiting to ignite. She didn't know what it was made of, pride, rage, desperation, but it kept her upright. Kept her from crumbling completely. She listened. Watched. Memorized routines. Noticed that the Wi-Fi sometimes flickered when the children used their tablets, that Laura always hid the family passwords in the same drawer, folded beneath receipts and old bills. She stored that knowledge like a squirrel hoarding seeds for winter. One day, one of the twins dropped their tablet in the bathroom sink. It didn't break, just glitched. She offered to fix it. Laura rolled her eyes and tossed it at her without comment. When she powered it on, she realized it hadn't been locked. No passwords. No restrictions. A browser still open. She stared at the glowing screen as if it were a door flung wide to the world. Her fingers hovered. Her breath hitched. But before she could type a word, Laura called from the kitchen. The moment passed, and the tablet was taken away. Still, she had seen the cracks. The locks weren't perfect. The walls weren't solid. They were just painted that way. She started pretending again. Smiling when spoken to. Working faster, quieter. She praised the twins when they did the bare minimum. She nodded when Laura lectured her. She made herself small, forgettable. A shadow among shadows. But behind her eyes, she was wide awake. Every day she replayed the letter in her mind. She remembered the wording, the name of the admissions officer, the address on the return envelope. She rehearsed it like a script. The pain was still there, but it had changed. Hardened. Sharpened. She no longer felt like a girl waiting to be saved. She felt like someone hiding a blade behind a smile. She didn't know how or when. But she knew she'd leave. Knew she'd find a way. The house might have caged her, She knew escape but it would hadn't not be erased simple. her. There Not would be yet. no grand, cinematic And until sprint she through could the front open that door, no she would triumphant wait. exit with bags in hand
She would
and a
watch.
taxi waiting outside.
She would remember.
Her life wasn't a movie.
And when the day came,
It
she
was a
would
quiet
not look
war,
back.
one fought in shadows, in small rebellions, in the careful gathering of forgotten details. Each day, she added another fragment to her growing arsenal of knowledge, Laura's daily schedule down to the minute, her father's exact commute times, the way the twins always fell into deep sleep after 8:30, the fact that the garage door made a soft click when opened manually, quieter than the front lock by far. She watched and waited, storing every piece of information like a prisoner carving a map into stone walls. Her world was limited, but not empty. She still had the broken tablet, now kept secretly beneath the couch cushion where the twins had grown bored with it. Its glitchy screen was an obstacle, but its access to the internet made it invaluable. Late at night, she would sneak into the living room, drape a blanket over the screen to mask the light, and search in silence. She looked up local bus routes, shelters, programs for youth in crisis, even old articles on how to replace lost documents. She knew she'd need ID to enroll anywhere, to work, to be anything other than invisible. Her original documents were locked in Laura's bedroom, but she found a way around that too, slowly copying down her school records, memorizing her social security number from an old form she once filed for a summer job. Nothing was wasted. Every bit of data became a key. She created an anonymous email address, then a second one, in case the first was compromised. She reached out to the admissions officer from the college who had signed her letter, crafting the message carefully, explaining her situation without desperation, only clarity. She didn't ask for sympathy. She asked for options. Time passed before the response arrived, but when it did, it changed everything. The officer remembered her. Her scholarship had been cancelled due to non-responsiveness, but reinstating it was not impossible, if she could submit the proper forms and confirm her identity. The fall semester was already underway, but a late spring start could be arranged. Her heart pounded as she read the message 3 times over, hands trembling. It was not a yes, but it wasn't a no. It was something far more dangerous to those who controlled her. It was hope. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the storm build inside her. She was close now. Close enough to see the other side. But that only made her more careful. She began to phase out of her routines gradually, so Laura wouldn't notice. She deliberately forgot to clean under the sink one day, then made a show of scrubbing it furiously the next. She made small mistakes to draw attention away from the fact that her mind was elsewhere. When asked a question, she took longer to answer. She pretended to be confused by dates, even though she remembered every detail of her plan down to the hour. She timed her escape for a Thursday. Thursdays were Laura's self-care nights, when she went to visit her sister across town and didn't return until nearly midnight. Her father would be home, but he never left the bedroom after dinner anymore, and even when he did, he barely noticed her presence. The twins would be asleep, and the house would sink into the same eerie silence it always did after dark. That would be her window. She packed her bag in layers, over the course of days. A pair of jeans under her mattress one night. A sweater hidden in a laundry basket the next. She stored canned food and granola bars under loose floorboards in the closet, alongside an envelope of cash she had managed to save from the allowance Laura used to give her for groceries. She had told no one about her plan. Not her teachers, not any of her old friends, not even the admissions officer. It was safer that way. Her world had shown her how easily trust could be weaponized. Her biggest obstacle was the locked drawer in Laura's bedroom, the one that held her birth certificate, school transcripts, and state ID. She waited until the perfect opportunity presented itself. On a Tuesday afternoon, Laura left her phone in the living room while taking a long call on the porch. The screen was unlocked. With her heart racing, the girl searched the Notes app and found what she was hoping for, a list of passwords. Some for streaming services, others for utilities. But one stood out. Masterbed lockbox. She memorized it instantly. That night, once everyone had gone to bed, she crept into the bedroom, knees trembling, ears straining for any sound. Her father was asleep. She could hear the shallow rhythm of his snoring. She opened the drawer, entered the code, and found exactly what she needed. She didn't take the documents, she knew that would raise questions too early. Instead, she scanned them using the tablet's glitchy camera, saving the images to her cloud account. It wasn't perfect, but it would be enough to prove who she was. When she left the room, her hands were damp, her breathing shallow, but she didn't stop moving until she was safely back in her own bed. She began mentally rehearsing her route. Bus number 42 to the central station. Transfer to the regional line. 3 stops. Then a walk to the transitional housing facility she had contacted through her anonymous email. They knew she was coming, and they were expecting her on Thursday evening. 1 bag. No goodbyes. No notes. No apologies. The final step came sooner than she expected. Wednesday afternoon, Laura announced she wouldn't be back until late the next day. A hair appointment, dinner, and maybe drinks if she felt cute. The girl nodded, kept her face blank, but inside she could feel her bones vibrating. She barely slept that night, listening to the seconds tick by, whispering each movement of her plan to herself under her breath like a prayer. Thursday arrived and moved at a crawl. She did every chore twice, acted more obedient than ever, smiled when spoken to, laughed when appropriate. By the time dinner rolled around, her hands were sweating so badly she almost dropped a plate. At 7, Laura left. At 7:15, the twins were in bed. At 8, her father retreated to his room, clicking the door shut behind him. At 8:30, she opened the garage door in complete silence. The bag was already hidden behind the old lawnmower. The air outside was thicker than she had imagined, slung it over her shoulder,
heavy with heat,
and slipped into the night without looking back.
Her ears, different from the
stars above were
the
pale
house
and
she had
distant,
just left.
but they were the first real sign
That
of
house
freedom
had been
she
a
had
tomb,
seen in months,
stifling and sterile.
And she walked toward them,
This silence
not with
was
fear,
wild and
not with
sprawling,
hesitation,
full of possibility
but with
and
purpose.
danger.
She walked quickly, not daring to look behind her, the weight of the bag against her back grounding her with every step. Her shoes hit the pavement in a steady rhythm, and each stride felt like a defiance of the life she had been forced to live. The streets were mostly empty at that hour, shadows stretching long under the orange street lamps, casting the trees and telephone poles in eerie silhouettes. Her heart pounded, not just from the exertion but from the knowledge that this was it, she was in it now, the space between the trap and the unknown. She reached the first bus stop faster than she thought she would. No one else was there. The night breeze lifted the edges of her hair as she stood under the flickering light of the cracked lamp above the bench. Every sound made her flinch, a distant car engine, the scurry of something small in the bushes, the beep of a crosswalk signal too far away to matter. But the bus came. She boarded it with trembling fingers and found a seat near the back, curling in on herself as the vehicle lurched forward. The driver didn't look at her twice. That felt like a victory. She didn't exist to him, and in this moment, that invisibility was her armor. The ride was long, and the city passed by her window like a dream. Strip malls, shuttered gas stations, neon signs half-lit. Each stop the bus made threatened to shatter her calm. She feared someone would step on and call her name, point at her, drag her off by the wrist. But no one came. Her father's silence had become his weakness, and Laura's vanity had made her careless. No one knew yet. No one had sounded the alarm. And with every passing mile, the world they had built around her grew smaller in the rearview mirror. She made the transfer at the central station, her body taut with exhaustion but her mind blazing. There were more people here, the hum of conversations and shuffling footsteps creating a white noise that both comforted and terrified her. She avoided eye contact. She kept her hood up. She looked like 100 other girls, tired, distracted, just another soul passing through. She bought a cheap coffee from a vending machine just to hold something warm in her hands, to feel grounded. The second bus took longer to arrive, and as she waited, time seemed to crawl again. She read the same signs on the wall over and over, her fingers curling around the strap of her bag until they ached. When the second bus finally came, it was older and nearly empty. She sat by the window again, pressing her forehead to the cool glass. The city began to dissolve into suburbs, then into patches of woodland and industrial stretches. She didn't know this part of the region. It felt alien, but that was exactly what she needed. Unfamiliar terrain. No chance of being recognized. By the time the final stop came into view, her legs were stiff, and her mouth was dry. But the ache in her bones was nothing compared to the fire in her chest. She had made it. Almost. The walk to the transitional home was longer than she had expected, down a cracked sidewalk bordered by overgrown hedges and dim porch lights. The building itself wasn't anything special, a squat, square brick structure with a flickering exterior bulb and a buzzer on the door. But to her, it looked like a fortress. Like sanctuary. She hesitated only once before pressing the button. A woman opened the door, older, with tired eyes and a kind smile that didn't ask questions. She said the girl's name, the real one, not the version twisted into servitude. The girl nodded. She was shown to a room. Not much more than a bed, a small desk, and a closet with a mismatched set of hangers. But the door had a lock. She stood in the middle of it for a long time before sitting on the bed, feeling its unfamiliar softness, letting the truth start to settle. But freedom wasn't relief. It was a different kind of weight. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Her body was still locked in the rhythm of fear, every creak in the floor outside the room made her stomach tighten, every voice in the hallway a potential threat. Her fingers hovered over the email from the admissions officer, the message waiting to be answered, waiting to shape the next phase of her life. She knew what needed to come next, but her limbs felt heavy with everything that had come before. The next morning, she met with the program coordinator. They spoke for a long time. She shared just enough to explain her situation without unraveling. The woman asked careful questions, took notes, offered timelines and paperwork. It felt overwhelming, but it was forward motion. One foot in front of the other. She would need to file a report, replace her official documents, reapply for the scholarship, and provide proof of her situation. It would be weeks before anything moved, and longer still before she could live on her own. But it was a path, however winding. She emailed the admissions officer again, attaching the scanned images, explaining her delay. The response came swiftly this time. They were impressed she had managed to preserve what she had. There was still a chance. Not a guarantee, but a real chance. Her hands shook as she read the message, her vision swimming. For the first time in months, she cried, not from fear or despair, but from release. That day, she went outside and sat in the sun for no reason at all. No chores. No eyes watching her. Just the sound of cars passing in the distance, and the wind rustling the branches above. She leaned back on the wooden bench, eyes closed, and let herself breathe. She knew Laura would be searching for her now. Maybe even her father. She knew there would be questions, accusations, efforts to reel her back into that world. But none of them mattered anymore. She had stepped through the fire, knowing it could burn her, and on the other side, she had found not ashes, but space. And in that space, she would rebuild. She wasn't safe yet, not truly. But she was free. And that was more than enough. She felt the shift before it arrived. It was subtle at first, an email from a counselor at the transitional center asking if she'd be willing to meet with someone from the past. No names were given, but she understood immediately. The timing aligned too perfectly. The silence had been too long. They had noticed she was gone. She had imagined this moment so many times during those months of planning, the reckoning, the confrontation, the voices raised in denial, the pleas, the attempts to manipulate her into returning. But now that it was here, it felt distant, like a story she'd once heard and half forgotten. The request was declined. She didn't need to hear their voices again to know what they would say. Instead, she focused on moving forward. Her days became a rhythm of applications, counseling sessions, part-time jobs, and online classes. Each task brought structure, and each small achievement planted roots in the new world she was building. Her college acceptance had been reinstated, pending her appearance and the completion of remaining paperwork. Her savings were modest, but growing. She had secured an off-campus housing option through a student support grant, and for the first time in her life, she would have her own keys. Then came the letter. Handwritten, postmarked from her old neighborhood, addressed to her by name. The handwriting was unmistakable. It had once written grocery lists and chore assignments, cruel little reminders left on the refrigerator. Now, the same hand trembled on paper, apologizing. Laura. The apology was thin, laced with excuses, wrapped in guilt. She claimed she didn't understand what she had done. She said she had only wanted to protect the family. She said she thought the girl had given up on college. There was no mention of the burned letter, no admission of sabotage. Just vague regrets and empty sentiment. She asked her to come home, said the twins missed her, said the house was quieter without her in it. That same week, a voicemail arrived. Her father's voice, slower than she remembered, older. He didn't ask her to come back. He simply said her name, followed by a long pause, then a sigh. And that was it. No explanation, no acknowledgement of what had allowed. Just a voice calling into silence, hoping to be heard. She let the messages sit. She didn't respond. There was nothing to say. The people who had built the prison she lived in didn't get to narrate her freedom. She had crawled out of their grip on her own, with blistered hands and a heart scarred from months of isolation and manipulation. They could not be part of her recovery. They were the reason it was necessary. Despite everything, part of her felt the pull. A phantom instinct telling her to reach back, to explain, to forgive. But she had learned the hard way that forgiveness was not always a bridge, it was sometimes a weapon used to pull someone back into the fire they barely escaped. She held that boundary with resolve. Her therapist helped her name it. Her friends at the shelter reinforced it. Her classmates in early lectures, strangers who knew nothing of her past, became proof that people could exist without demanding pieces of her soul. Laura tried again. An email this time. This one angrier. How dare she run away? How selfish she was to leave her family behind. How ungrateful. She called her dramatic, unstable, rebellious. The shift from pleading to blame didn't surprise her. It was the natural order of things with people like Laura. Love was only ever offered when it could be weaponized. But this time, there was no fear. Just a bitter sense of finality. The old house had become a memory now. She could picture the exact grain of wood on the banister, the way the floor creaked near the laundry room, the smell of burnt coffee that always seemed to linger in the kitchen. But it didn't hurt anymore. It was a page she had turned. The letters, the voicemails, the emails, they were echoes of a storm that had already passed. Months went by. She started school. The campus was alive in ways she had never imagined. People laughed openly, studied late in libraries, argued over books and politics and films. She learned how to take up space again. How to speak with her full voice. How to write without censorship. Her professors didn't know her story. They didn't need to. They knew her as driven, curious, sharp. No one looked at her like she was a burden. In a writing class, she submitted an essay about silence. About how sometimes survival isn't loud, it's quiet and methodical. It's walking away from everything you've ever known because even the unknown is kinder than what you left behind. Her professor pulled her aside and told her the essay had moved him. He asked if she would be willing to publish it in the campus journal. She agreed. It was the first time her voice would live on a page by choice, not obligation. She eventually moved into her own apartment, a studio barely large enough for a bed and a desk, but it was hers. She bought a plant for the window and named it after her grandmother. She cooked pasta on a single-burner stove and danced in her socks while waiting for the water to boil. There was no one to yell if she left a dish in the sink. No one to monitor how late she stayed up. The silence that once suffocated her had become something else entirely. Peace. From time to time, she would dream of the house. Of the front door locked from the inside. Of the mailbox that never held anything for her. But in the dreams now, she was never stuck. She always had the keys. Always walked away. Back home, they likely told stories. Laura to her friends. Her father to co-workers. Maybe even to the neighbors. They probably painted themselves as victims. They probably edited her out of the narrative or reduced her to a cautionary tale. But it didn't matter. Their version of the story was no longer the only one. She had her truth. She had her voice. And she had rebuilt her life from the ashes they left behind. They had returned to seek forgiveness, to regain control, to rewrite history. But they had come too late. Far too late. Because by the time they reached for her, she had already stepped into a future where they no longer had any power.